So I've been trying to decrease my physical TBR this year, and I read one book this month off my physical TBR, and I bought it this year. Hey, what is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, or to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Ivy, and today we are going to be going through the books that I read in February. This was such a rough reading month for me. I read 6 books, and I'm not really sure how, because I was in truly the biggest reading slump. Nothing really put me into it. I just didn't feel like watching book content, looking at my books, reading books, listening to an audiobook. Literally just the thought of books didn't excite me. It felt very similar to when I wasn't like reading for years. It just kind of felt like that, like, they're books, you know? I read 3 books though in the first 3 days of February. Like, I read a book a day the first 3 days of February, so it was starting off to be like a great month. And it did not turn out that way. I also only read 1 book off of my physical TBR, which is a little rough. We started off the month with the 1 physical TBR book I read, which is the 2nd volume of Heartstopper. I didn't like this one quite as much as I liked the first one. I still liked it. The first one, I just remember I finished it and I was like, I need the second one right now. And I didn't really feel that way with this one. I honestly don't even really remember. Oh, actually, I do kind of remember what this one was about. This was actually so cute. I'm looking at it, I kind of forgot what happened in this book, but if you don't know what the Heartstopper series is about, it's about these 2 kids in high school just kind of going through high school in a relationship together, kind of coming to terms with their sexuality and what other people think of their sexuality. And the first book was just kind of them coming to terms with the fact that they liked each other. And then this book was really interesting because it was kind of them trying to integrate one another into their friend groups. But this book was really beautiful. They're just really cute books. Everybody said about like how cute these are, and I don't know why I didn't believe them, but they're just like so stinking cute. When people described the cheat sheet as a cupcake, these are cupcakes. The cheat sheet, not a cupcake. The cheat sheet, literally the driest piece of cornbread you've ever eaten. This, vanilla cupcake. The next book I read, I finished up the To All the Boys series. I read P.S. I Love You. This one, I actually remember thinking while I was reading it that I felt like I didn't really need that book. And at the end of it, in the author's note, it said that she wrote that book for the audience because they wanted another book, but she kind of already thought she had wrapped up Lara Jean's story. And that made me kind of like the book a lot more because I felt like I understood why it was the way that it was. This book follows Lara Jean and Peter, obviously, and kind of what they're going to do when they go to college, and are they going to go to college together, or are they going to be able to go to college together, that kind of thing. And I just thought that this was like a nice coming of age book. These books aren't my favorite. I didn't love them as much as I had loved the Summer I Turned Pretty books. I need to turn off my phone. But I did really like this book, and I thought that it was a nice little conclusion to Lara Jean's story. And yeah, it was fine. It was okay. I kind of stopped rating my books this month. I'm not really sure why. I just feel like none of my books I felt really strongly about the ratings, but these were okay. I would say they were pretty average for me. They didn't stick with me, but I definitely think that Jenny Han's books, just some of them are really, you're gonna really relate to them, and some of them you aren't. I think that I can really relate to Belly, and I couldn't really relate to Lara Jean, and I think a lot of people kind of feel the opposite way. So I definitely think that if you can relate to her character, you would like these a lot better, but I just thought that this series was okay, but I am glad that I finished it. The next book that I read was The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. This book had quite a bit of hype on Book Talk, BookTube, all of that. It was a book of the month book, and everybody just said it was like a really good romance book, and I thought this book was okay. It's not that I didn't like it. I think that I was just kind of waiting for something more because of how much everybody liked it. I did like it. This was definitely like a perfect fake dating. Like, to me, this is how fake dating should be. And I really liked that aspect of it. I liked the family aspect of it. There were just like a couple certain things in the book that I would have tweaked a little bit, and overall I didn't have this crazy emotional connection to the storyline or to any of the characters. If you don't know what this book is about, this book follows a bodyguard, and it's kind of like a reverse bodyguard trope because the bodyguard is actually the female protagonist. I cannot remember her name for the life of me. I want to say his name was Gabe, but I don't think that's right. Hannah and Jack. Literally. Never would have guessed Hannah and Jack. So Hannah is a bodyguard, and she gets hired for this high profile case for this guy named Jack Stapleton, who is a really big actor and therefore has some, you know, crazed fans, and he has a stalker. He's going home to be with his family, and he obviously is worried about his stalker following him and being around his family and kind of like stalking his family, but he doesn't want his family to know he has a stalker. So they hire Hannah to be his bodyguard, but she's going in pretending that she's his girlfriend. That way it kind of makes sense that she's always around and she never leaves his side and she does everything with him because she's his girlfriend. And it was definitely a cute romance. I just don't think that I personally connected with it. So if the story sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend it. It just personally wasn't for me my favorite, but I know so many people who loved it. The next book that I read was probably my favorite book of the month, and that was One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I read this book in less than 24 hours. I remember I couldn't like decide what book I wanted to pick up next, and I read the first pages of a couple books, and I literally read the first page of this book and I automatically knew this was the book I wanted to read. I just feel like her writing really just consumes me and really gets me into the story. I felt so emotionally distraught for the main character in this book whenever she was grieving and just kind of dealing with that. I will say that I knew how this book was going to end before I even started it. I just had a really strong hunch on who I thought she was going to choose, and I was correct. So a lot of people say that this book leaves them guessing and they have no idea what's going to happen and they're really torn. I personally wasn't torn at all, and she did make the right decision in my opinion. If you don't know what this book is about, this is about a woman who gets married pretty young. She marries her high school sweetheart. They have this great romance. They're carefree, they're free-spirited, and he gets this job the day before their first anniversary, and it requires him flying to Alaska, and his little plane actually ends up going down. They find, I think there's 4 people on the plane, and they find one person's body, so they just kind of presume that they're all dead. So it kind of goes through our main character, her grieving with her loss, her trying to come to terms with the fact that the whole life she had envisioned for herself is just gone. And then it kind of jumps forward a little bit and she reconnects with someone from her childhood, and she ends up moving on. She falls in love and they get engaged. And right after they get engaged, she gets a call that her fiance is alive and that he survived and he's coming home. So she's really just torn on what to do because she has these 2 great loves, and both of them kind of deserve to be with her, and they both deserve to be one person's true love. So it's just kind of her going through this back and forth on who she should pick. There's also just beautiful family dynamics in this book. They run a little bookstore, a little family bookstore, them kind of running it and taking it over, and I just loved the whole bookstore aspect and the family aspect of this book. Overall, this book was so good. I definitely don't find myself thinking about it a lot. I find that books that I speed through, I kind of forget more easily than books that I take my time with, but I would absolutely recommend this book. If you're not interested in Taylor Jenkins Reid's backlist, this one is absolutely worth the read. The next book that I read is Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood. I may have made a mistake by reading this one first. I have not read The Love Hypothesis yet, but the hold for Love on the Brain came through, so I was like, guess we're reading this one first. I actually listened to the audiobook, and again, I feel very similar towards this book that I feel about The Bodyguard. I liked it, but there wasn't anything that I felt super attached to or emotionally connected with. This is about a girl named B who had this kind of beef with her, I believe it was her student teacher. That's not the correct word. The correct word. The teaching assistant. she had this beef with her teaching assistant in grad school. Fast forward, she's in her career, she's a scientist, and she gets this really amazing opportunity to work for NASA, and she thinks she's going to be kind of leading the project, and it ends up that she's actually going to be co-leading it with her teaching assistant from grad school that she had like beef with. I think his name is Levi. Again, I thought this book was cute. There are definitely some things that I would like love to ask Hallie Hazelwood about. One thing that I thought about this book that was a little weird, that just kind of caught me off guard, it was, again, it's one of those books that it's very clear that the man is behaving a certain way because he likes her, not because he hates her, and that the woman's just reading it wrong. But she just like openly says like, oh, because you hate me. And I just found it to be so odd that she was so blunt about the fact that she thought he hated her, which I will say that I think when it comes to people who have been in academics that long, I think that a lot of them are kind of socially awkward or socially stunted because so many of their years have been used to do nothing but study, so they kind of miss out on that social aspect of life and that social maturity. So I think maybe that's why that was in there, but I'm not really sure. Overall, I just thought this book was like a typical romance book. It was cute, it was fun, it wasn't revolutionary. If you're interested in the storyline, or if you like, you know, women in STEM in books, I would definitely recommend it, but it wasn't like the best book I've ever read. And then the last book I read this month was another graphic novel, and it's very interesting because I was like, I can't believe I read 6 books this month, and 2 of them are graphic novels. They did not take me a long time at all. But the last book I read was Gender Queer, and this book is about it's about a memoir just kind of reflecting on someone coming to terms with their sexuality and how they identify and just things like that. And it was very interesting. I actually ended up picking up this book because it was the most banned book last year, so I was very intrigued on kind of why that is. Obviously it's banned because changing your gender identity or using different pronouns is obviously very controversial or just a debated topic. I definitely thought that this was a really beautiful memoir. I think that the author did a really good job on just kind of describing what it's like to be an adolescent and how confusing it can be, and how puberty can make you feel like your body doesn't belong to you and it's just kind of having like a mind of its own, and how that can really harm your thoughts and how you view yourself. And overall, I thought that this was a really nice memoir. I definitely think that if you're not familiar with people who are transgender, people who are non-binary, or people who just use different pronouns that maybe you haven't heard of, the author of this book uses er pronouns, I think. I definitely think this book is very interesting and educational, just because it's different than what we see in a lot of typical literature, especially fiction literature. There was also one part of this book that I specifically wanted to mention because I just thought it was really interesting, but it talks about how it was a doctor. It was coming from like an excerpt of some doctors. It was either like a speech that they had given or from one of their books, but it was about how in the womb, you know that how people kind of say that everybody is born as a girl first? That's not technically true, but in the womb, when an embryo or a zygote is forming, something, I believe it's a protein, has to be introduced for the embryo to develop male sex organs and to develop kind of a male brain. And if that protein isn't introduced, you're automatically going to develop female sex organs and your brain is going to kind of stay the same. So that's why people kind of say that like everybody's born or everybody's first created as a woman. But the doctor kind of went into how when this protein is released, that it can kind of be stunted and it will send the signals to your body to develop male sex organs, but it doesn't make its way up to your brain. Therefore, you kind of don't develop your male brain, and you kind of, or I guess it's your male brain, not this. You don't develop the brain that you would have had as a boy, you keep the same brain that you would have developed anyway, but your body kind of develops into a male body. And I thought that that was a very interesting way to kind of explain why people are transgender, and kind of more of like a scientific way, if that's kind of how your brain works. I would read it from the book, but I don't have the book. I borrowed it from my library. It's definitely explained much better in the book, and like I said, it's a graphic novel, so it's not going to take a ton of your time, and I would definitely recommend it. It is short, concise, and you will absolutely learn something. So those are the 6 books that I read in the month of February. I typically will put something else at the end of these wrap-up videos if they're not quite as long or if I don't have quite as many books, like a haul or a TBR. I'm not actually going to make a TBR this month. I decided that I'm going to completely mood read, not make any sort of TBR, and I'm very, very excited for that. So I'm currently filming a reading vlog, so if you're interested in what I'm reading in the month of March, make sure you subscribe so you can keep up with that and keep an eye out for the reading vlog that is coming. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys!